Yep.
It was women in the eastern suburbs who knew I was a poet who came to me and said, "We've lost our homes. They are covered in liquefaction." In some cases, they couldn't go back because there were cordons, and they wanted a way to grieve, but they couldn't find any words. And they trusted me to help them. And so it is a women's story. It took quite a while to develop that and to find something that I was happy with, which had hopefully a timeless quality, which I think is important in liturgy, that it can cross different cultures and periods of time. So I started writing a very simple article, really, about 4 years after the earthquake. Then I felt, I'm a church historian, I'm an Anglican, I'm in a marvellous living tradition of liturgy, and I need to understand that if I'm going to make my own contribution. So I started to read the pastoral liturgies within a New Zealand prayer book here. And so there's the farewelling of a home. Sorry, that's mine. That'll be in the next canon. There's the blessing of a home, and there's the takihi whare, which is prayers in a house after death. And so I really enjoyed getting involved in something quite different from my normal church history, which is social and religious history. So this is looking at texts in context, not exegesis as such, but looking at their development, looking at human beings who are involved in creating them, because there are no authors, of course, in this New Zealand prayer book. And it was through people like Jenny Dawson, who's here joining us. She gave me quite a lot of the backstory of these liturgies. And so after studying the takihi whare and looking at the question, was it a pre-Christian, pre-contact rite? How did it change through Māori Christianity? How is it used today? Then looking at blessing of a home and speaking to Archbishop David Moxon, who wrote it as quite a young man. And I thought maybe a seed was planted then that I could write something. So that was a marvellous journey of discovery. So through the Australian Journal of Liturgy, that's okay, Australian Journal of Liturgy, this is where the farewelling of a home was published, together with the article that some of you may have seen from my website. Have any of you downloaded that or seen it? Good. Okay. So in a way, I had to write this backwards because I started to write the liturgy and then I had to rewrite the article, at least the end of the article, to show there was sort of inevitability that this is the liturgy I would write, having done this analysis. The way I want to proceed is to read you some poems as well as some prayers to show how they're related and show something of my life and my journey. And then to talk about various points in the liturgy and the structure it fits into, which is rites of passage, which is a very well-known typology in religions. All religions and all cultures have rites of passage, but they need to be a bit different today because of our society. Some ideas like lament, how important lament is to the farewelling of a home, and then to look at the poetic aspects of my writing. So I'd like to start off today with a poem. Some of you will know my book, Tuning Wordsworth's Piano. This is the most recent collection. And because it is my birthday today, I'm going to read a poem I wrote 3 years ago called 60th Pentecost. So you can work out how old I am. So I thought rather than 60th birthday, it's my 60th Pentecost, and this did fall on Pentecost. And I'm in the cardboard cathedral, which is made of cardboard tubes. The light comes through and makes amazing patterns. My hands were anointed by a woman priest who was a great friend of my late mother, and she gave me a double helping of oil. So I was playing there in the pew with this oil. It's called 60th Pentecost. Chrism slops in the boat of my hands on the skin of a coracle. Palms form a pan for mountain streams to swirl their fines and specks of gold. The light of the world is playing form and void, forwards and backwards in the mirror of a whare tent cathedral. The oily meniscus quivers with the cross, pressed into hands, folds deep as a newborn's, wrapped in vernix from her mother's womb. So I was looking into 60-year-old hands and seeing the newborn hands. Now, when we look at the home, I think we have to ask, why have there been so few liturgies written for the home? Not quite true in the Latin Missal. There are many services there, I think about 10 for the blessing of a home, but you will not find any for the farewelling of a home. So for me, the home is the site of the sacred. For people with no outward expression of faith, it is still a place of the sacred, of the transcendent, even if they don't have a language to describe that. And I would say the home needs to be honoured more with many more liturgies. The home deserves liturgies. So when it comes to the home, it's very interesting because the New Zealand prayer book didn't talk about the blessing of a house. They talked about the blessing of a home, because Catholics could bless things like blessing fields in the Middle Ages, blessing a new motorbike and making sure the steam sizzles when you throw the holy water on it, that kind of thing. And they have no trouble with that at all, whereas Protestants would have difficulty thinking of blessing inanimate things, that only people can receive God's grace and blessing. So the blessing of a home in New Zealand prayer book overcomes these differences and difficulties by saying the word home, which means both the blessing of the physical home, but also the people who will live in it. And so that's a very important, I think, concept there. So we need more liturgies for homes, there's no question about that. When, again, I was wanting to write this liturgy, I thought, I need to be sure no one has written it before, which is a pretty obvious question. And because I'm an historian, I started to look in all sorts of different places, various online tools. I found a marvellous liturgy in the book that Hannah Ward and Jennifer Wild put together in 1995 called Human Rights. And it was a liturgy by a New Zealand Anglican priest called Eris Fairbrother. And this was farewelling a home in the context of the separation or end of a relationship. And I thought that was excellent that she was including the home in that. But there are many other reasons for farewelling a home. And for me, it was the earthquake, which really pointed out the extreme need that created. So in this extreme need, people came to priests and their clergy and said, we have lost everything. We want to lament, we want to go back, we want to grieve, we want to take something with us, we want to look to the future. And they said, oh, look, and they found nothing. People like Helen Roud, who's a priest in our diocese, who's very creative, she made something up on the spot. And she was a chaplain to the churchill courts, which had many elderly people there. And so she formed her own little liturgy. So I was delighted to find that when I was looking, there were sort of on the ground examples that had been created, again, out of the earthquake. So came out of this extreme need. So one thing that separates my liturgy, I think, from others of farewell is this concept, this idea of lament, which is really central to the whole thing. You might ask, if someone is leaving a much-loved family home of maybe 50 years, as one of our parishioners was, to move into a retirement village, is lament an appropriate idea? Is there loss? Of course there's loss. It's how we express it, I think. So I'd like to read you a poem from my first major collection, which is called A World Without Maps. And these women in Abu Dhabi, I taught there for about 5 months, 10 years ago, and they are vigorously, wildly tossing their hair in a dance, a sacred dance. So there are a number of poems in here from the earthquake. I'm going to read a very short poem, which is the last poem in the book. It's called Behind the Cordon, Cashel Mall. Cashel Mall was where there was some of the most damage, destruction from the earthquake. And there was a trade aid, a third world shop there, committed to just wages for people in third world countries. Behind the Cordon, Cashel Mall. Sweet grass, damp hemp in the shop off the mall. No one to smell, so no scent. Liniment and fragrant oils, hearts and bodies that ache. No one to buy, so no giver. Markets cut off, first world's now third, as their soldiers arrive. No lutins, nothing worth taking. Bamboo flutes played by the wind. The city's old body has gone. Young couples gently touch. Peace and justice rise, kiss. Now that poem has got all the seeds of lament and hope for the future. And it was only when I was about to launch the liturgy, I went back and looked at this poem and I thought, wow, I wrote this 10 years ago. And everything that the liturgy about in terms of loss and hope for the future and relationships and justice is in that poem. So I wanted to read that one to you. Now, so lament can be the disbelief and shock at the sudden loss of a home taken in natural disaster. In future, it may be global warming as coastlines are taken. Increasingly, houses in New Zealand have to be abandoned. It's the finality of no going back. There is no going back. And so there are two phrases in the liturgy that more or less bookend it. So that's my neighbour's phone that's going off. She's apologising. Here we are. Okay, this is acknowledging loss. I don't know if any of you have the liturgy with you. So these are the prayers that anyone can read. They're not related to natural disaster or loved one dying. O God of beginnings and endings, it is time for us to leave this place, our home, for 5 generations, for it to become another's. There is no going back. Be to us wisdom and light as we walk on unfamiliar paths. Now, for me, for it to become another's, there's almost a sense there of violation. Not someone invading your house and trashing it, but that sacred space is now going to be broken into and taken over by another person. So that to me is quite a powerful statement. So that's the reality. And then right at the end of the liturgy, page 17, the group sends the householder out. There's no priest necessarily in this liturgy, no ordained person. Let us go in peace, and then we will not come here again. Ka hora tātou e haere mai nei anō. We will not come here again. That's a definite statement of finality, of ending. So those two statements, if you like, bookend the whole liturgy, which is very important. Just maybe a word about my sense of where my sense of a lament came from. In 1974, our much-loved Labour Prime Minister, Norman Kirk, died in office. He was only 51. And I can still remember his coffin coming down the steps of Parliament. Very big man, so it was touch and go, was it going to come down okay? And the kākaranga were calling out this incredibly piercing cry, and it just cut me to the core, and I wanted to weep. And that was appropriate because he was a marvellous man, anti-nuclear campaigner. He went to Muro on the frigate and protested, etc. And so with this liturgy, when we say there's a lament, I want the householder and their friends to have the freedom, if they want, to weep, or to hold that and take it to another place where they feel it is more appropriate to weep. But I would love them to feel they have the permission through the liturgy, through the words, through the pauses and the silence, to express their sense of loss. I think that's important. How are we going for time? Okay, good. Right. I might just give you a bit of a change. Maybe I'll talk about some of this imagery of the divine. Virginia Ramy Mollenkott was a huge influence on me in the mid-80s for her feminine images of God. She's just died. Saw the obituary in the Century and Christian Century, and she is very much an evangelical mould. So for her to come out with these images of God that have always been there in the Bible, but have only just been recovered recently, was very, very powerful to contemporaries. So I think most of us are familiar with the idea of God as wisdom, as feminine. Been a lot of books written about the wisdom of God. So there's the prayer and the study. And when we said this, Rowenia Douglas, who's a Māori Anglican priest, she was the first person to use this liturgy on Easter Monday. And it was very moving. She included a lot of her own Karakia, and very relaxed, family going through the house. 3 of us were with her, very good friends, and she invited me. So I felt privileged to be there. And so we said this prayer in the study, and they were all quite taken aback by it, because it isn't often what we expect Christianity to be. So I'll just read this to you. Wisdom with God from creation. We give you thanks for the many ways we have learned in this home, from others down the centuries, for newfound paths, for the struggle for truth, the wonder of a child, for courage to question, to ask and not find. Wisdom, give us eyes to see your love without limits, your truth setting us free. Now there's a point, I just put technically in that prayer, in terms of rhyme, it's if you are unrhymed, the beginning of it is unrhymed and the last is rhymed, eyes to see, your love without limits, your truth setting us free. That has a sort of completion and is satisfying. But if you start off with a rhyme and then have unrhymed lines, it ruins that sense of pattern. And so I'm very aware of this when I'm writing. I use quite a lot of sound play and word play, which we traditionally don't have in liturgy, I don't think, very much, but that's the poet in me. And sometimes I want to say things that are very difficult and try to find images for them. Just trying to find the page here. Oh, here we are. Prayer in the kitchen. You may not realise, you probably can see the range hood up there. I'm in a kitchen at the moment, which is the most cosy place in the house. So this is prayer in the kitchen. Creator God, we give thanks this day for cooking and conversation, for family and friends, unexpected guests, the fruit of the earth, the work of our hands, for recipes passed down, new ones to test, your kingdom like leaven in a lump of dough. the mustard seed sown that becomes a great tree.